What I have right here is the iPhone 14, which is in a very interesting position in Apple's lineup because of how similar it is to the iPhone 13. I mean, you compare the two side by side and there really isn't any noticeable difference. However, there are some minor improvements that I think people should be aware about. So in this video, I'm not only going to cover how well the iPhone 14 holds up going into 2025, but also compare it to some other used iPhones around the same price range, like the iPhone 13, the iPhone 15, and the rumored iPhone SE 4 that's supposed to come out, to help make you make the best purchasing decision. As I'm making this video right now, you can find the 6.1-inch iPhone 14 for $420 on Amazon and the 6.7-inch iPhone 14 Plus for $480. You can also buy these phones brand new from Apple for $600 for the iPhone 14 and $700 for the iPhone 14 Plus. Now, typically I don't recommend buying new unless you want a phone that's in brand new condition and has a new battery so you don't have to worry about replacing it later on down the line. Also, shameless plug here, if you are thinking about buying an iPhone off of Amazon, if you click one of the affiliate links down below and then purchase something after clicking one of those affiliate links, I get a small commission which helps support the channel a lot. So the first thing I want to talk about with this phone is performance. So this uses the same processor as the iPhone 13, the A15 Bionic chip, and performance-wise I would say it's about the same as the iPhone 13. However, with the iPhone 14, you do get an added GPU core, so it may help a little bit with games. Unfortunately, I couldn't really do any tests with games because I did borrow this from a phone repair shop I used to work for, and unfortunately they have the App Store disabled, so I couldn't test that. But I will say though, I used to own an iPhone XR and an iPhone 12, and games ran just fine on that, so I would definitely assume games would run pretty well on this phone as well. In terms of this phone running iOS 18, I don't really notice any slowdowns using it. I can open up apps and stuff and they'll load pretty much instantly. I'll open up a new app like Tips here and it'll load, within a second. The only time I did notice this phone slowing down though is with Wi-Fi, which I don't know if this is my Wi-Fi speeds, but I'll open up apple.com for example, and I guess that scenario will load pretty quickly. But if I open up the App Store, sometimes I notice it does take a while. So it can be server dependent, but Wi-Fi speeds on this phone, I would say generally are pretty good. And then in terms of wireless features, this phone does have 5G connectivity and Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth 5.3. So again, it has all the modern wireless chips that allow this phone to run pretty smoothly when it comes with wireless connectivity. Another thing to mention with this phone, and doesn't directly relate to performance, but is pretty important to know about, is this phone does not support Apple Intelligence, which if you don't know, that's basically Apple's onboard AI processing. So what that does is basically allows you to summarize notifications, rewrite text, and generate images. So a few different AI features that are used throughout the phone. And even though this phone's 2 years old, Apple didn't support it, which is very frustrating. And if you do want that, you're unfortunately going to have to dish out quite a bit of money for an iPhone 15 Pro or iPhone 16 and newer. And then when it comes to software support, this phone was released at the end of 2022. Typically iPhones last 6 to 7 years with the latest iOS updates, and then about another year or two of app support updates after that. So realistically, you're looking at about 4 years of the latest iOS updates on this phone, and about 2 years of app support updates after that, for a grand total of 6 years of use that this phone has left on it. However, I do want to mention though, just to get the most value out of your phone, I'd recommend holding on to this for not more than 3 to 4 years. That way you can sell it when it's still running the latest iOS update and you can get the most value for your phone. Another thing that's really important to talk about with this phone is battery life. So the iPhone 14 did get a 5% upgrade in battery life compared to the iPhone 13. Now I wanted to see how much of a difference this made, but unfortunately because I was borrowing this phone, I didn't get a super clear understanding of how that extra battery life plays into day-to-day use. However, I did see though, I have about 1 hour 31 minutes of screen on time, and as you can see, it lost, about 20% battery life. So that honestly ain't bad, and I did look up online to see what other people said they would get for battery life. Unfortunately, I didn't find a clear example of an iPhone 14 specifically, but with the iPhone 13s, people said they'd get about 8 hours of screen on time, and even 10 plus hours of screen on time in some scenarios. So battery life on this phone is definitely going to be enough to last most people throughout the day. However, if you are going to be someone who's using this heavily, like for heavy gaming or playing music all the time, it may drain battery life a bit quicker. Another thing that's going to affect your battery life is battery health. So what battery health is basically as the phone is used over time and as it ages, the battery holds less capacity. So this iPhone 14 holds 95% of the battery health that the original battery had. So you're basically getting 95%, of what the original battery had in it. So this is something you definitely want to consider as you're negotiating down on price for the phone, is what is the battery health at. And then in terms of cost to replace the battery, it's $100 to get replaced from Apple and $90 to get replaced from a third party. And then moving on to this phone's design. So what's really interesting about the iPhone 14 is it's pretty much the exact same design as the iPhone 13. So you're getting the same boxy design, the same diagonal cameras, and the same smaller notch. However, there is one noticeable difference on the outside, and that's that the iPhone 14 does not have a SIM card tray. So the iPhone 14 is the first eSIM exclusive iPhone model. So what an eSIM is it's basically a digitally activated SIM card that's built into the phone. So when you transfer your data to an eSIM phone like the iPhone 14, how that works is in the setup process, it basically pairs over with the iPhone 14 from your old phone, and it transfers your phone number along with your cellular data carrier plan to this phone. Another difference design-wise with the iPhone 14, and this is more internal, is the back glass is a lot easier to replace now, which can help save costs when it comes to back glass repairs. But one thing that is kind of a downside though with the iPhone 14's design is it still uses lightning charging. So the newer iPhones like the iPhone 15s, iPhone 16s, use USB-C charging, which is a lot more commonly used than the lightning cable. But ignoring that negative and focusing on a positive about the design of this phone probably has to be the screen. So the screen is a 6.1-inch OLED screen, the same as the iPhone 13. But what's exciting about the iPhone 14 series is they released a bigger model of the iPhone 14, the iPhone 14 Plus, that comes in a 6.7-inch OLED screen size, which is really nice for those who like bigger phones. And I'm sure you're wondering what is an OLED screen. What an OLED screen is it's a screen that turns off individual pixels when the color black is displayed. And therefore, it gives you higher color contrast, more vibrancy, and it looks a lot better in darker environments. But one thing this phone screen sadly doesn't have is 120 Hz, which makes scrolling, animations, and opening apps just feel a lot smoother. Now, you do need an iPhone 13 Pro or newer Pro model iPhone to have this feature, but it would be really nice if this phone has it, but unfortunately, it does not. And then now we're going to move on to the major downside of all iPhone models, and that is repairability. Unfortunately, a screen replacement is $280 from Apple. Third parties, it's a bit cheaper, $150 for a non-OLED screen, but still that is kind of ridiculous for screen prices. A back glass is $170 to get replaced by Apple, which is actually half the price of the iPhone 13's back glass replacement. So if you think you might break the back glass, the iPhone 14 is definitely the way to go. But most other repairs are going to range from $80 to $200. So definitely be careful of this phone. Invest in a high quality screen protector and a high quality case so you can try to avoid those really expensive repair costs. And then let's talk about this phone's camera. So the cameras on the iPhone 14 are basically exactly the same as the iPhone 13's, but have two minor differences. The first being this thing called the photonic engine, which basically uses machine learning to improve the quality of photos, especially with things like lighting and color. And then there's this other feature too called action mode, which basically stabilizes the video in high action scenarios that you can activate with a tap of a button. But other than that, the iPhone 14's camera is your typical slightly above average smartphone camera. It has a 12 megapixel camera on the back, a 12 megapixel camera on the front, and it can record 4K 60 frames per second video. But I will say though, if you are a huge camera nut, I would consider the iPhone 14 Pro as it does have some more camera features like macro photography, ProRes recording, and 3x optical zoom. And then in terms of where you're missing out camera feature wise compared to newer iPhones is first of all, this thing called camera control that the iPhone 16s have that basically allow you to quickly open up the camera and adjust camera settings. You're missing out on a 48 megapixel camera on the back for more detail, macro photography for close-up shots, But other than that, you're not missing out on a whole lot camera-wise. Next up, we're going to go into a comparison of this iPhone to some other iPhones around the same price range. First up, we have the iPhone 13, which I'd recommend unless you can find the iPhone 14 for around the same price. And currently, you can find the 6.1-inch iPhone 13 for $380, and they also made a smaller 5.4-inch iPhone 13 mini, which you can find for $340. As you can probably tell by now, the iPhone 13 is very similar to the iPhone 14 in a lot of ways. However, there are a few differences you miss out on. The first being is the back glass is $170 cheaper to replace. You have 5 GPU cores instead of 6 GPU cores. You miss out on 5% extra battery life. You have added camera features that you're missing out on, like action mode for smoother videos and high action scenarios, and the photonic engine for better photo quality, emergency SOS via satellite, and that's literally it. I'm going to start off with the iPhone 13 Pro, which has a very similar design, however, it has a stainless steel frame. You're also getting a lot of added camera features like 3x optical zoom, the LiDAR sensor, macro photography for close-up shots, night mode portraits, and ProRes video for high-quality video. And then there's a few other things that are nice too on it, like 10% more battery life, 120 Hz for smoother scrolling animations, and you can find these for $480 for the 6.1-inch iPhone 13 Pro, and then $560 for the 6.7-inch iPhone 13 Pro Max. And then we have the iPhone 15, which does have some actual upgrades. The first one being is this thing called the Dynamic Island, which is basically what replaces the notch and kind of morphs to what you're doing on your phone, if that makes any sense. You also get USB-C charging, newer processors, and a 48 megapixel camera on the back to capture more detail. And then finally, we have the iPhone SE 4, which is going to be very similar design-wise to the iPhone 14. However, it's going to have a single 48 megapixel camera on the back. It's rumored to come out in spring of 2025 and it'll cost $500 for the base model. Now, there's a few reasons why I'd recommend the iPhone SE 4 over the iPhone 14 once it comes out. The first one being is you're getting some smaller design features that are actually going to be greatly appreciated, like USB-C charging instead of Lightning, which is more commonly used. And then this ringer switch is going to be replaced with the action button, which you can program to do certain functions on your phone. You're also getting some other improvements too, like Apple Intelligence, which is Apple's on-device AI processing, which currently requires an iPhone 15 Pro, iPhone 16, or newer. And then you're going to get a newer processor, which is going to last you 5 to 7 years of the latest iOS updates. So if you're someone who likes to hold onto your phone for a long time and hope to resell it, the iPhone SE 4 would definitely be the way to go. But anyways, that concludes this review. I'll leave a video up on screen that's a review of the iPhone 13 if you're interested. I also have a playlist of a bunch of things you need to know about before buying a used iPhone, like how to test it out, as well as some other iPhone reviews. Thank you all for watching, and goodbye.